And that's Job there in the picture there. And things have gone rather badly for him. Does he look well-dressed and well-fed? He doesn't, does he? It's a long story, the story of Job. But he's someone who had the worst things happen to him. He asked himself, am I being tested by God? For a long time he accepted things as they got worse. He got thrown out of his house. He lost his wife, he lost his children. It was pretty awful. And one day he got to the point where he actually said, I wish I was never born. He cursed God that he'd actually ever been born. That's when his 3 friends came in. See him there? There was his friends. All 3 were not like my friend Robert. They were more like my friend, so-called friend, Nicky. Because they said to Job, it's all your fault. You're being punished. You're to blame for what's happened to you. You're a person of no significance. You know, Job put up with this for a while and he got to, but he said, no, that can't be true. You are not wise friends. And he then called out to God again. And what was God's answer? It's a great piece of poetry in the Bible. God's answer was to Job to remind him that creation was actually a marvellous thing. Despite the fact that awful things happen, all of life is God's, all humans are mortal. That is, there are things that happen over which we have no control, and no one is to blame. Now that's hard. Despite that, your life never stops being significant. The world and the great mystery, who is God, is simply awesome. And if you know that, you are truly wise. Well, that's a starter for the reading we're about to have.
The first reading, which is a witness of the writings, is from Job 28, reading from verses 12 to 15 and 20 to 28. But where can wisdom be found? Where does understanding dwell? No mortal comprehends its worth. It cannot be found in the land of the living. The deep says, it is not in me. The sea says, it's not with me. It cannot be bought with the finest gold, nor can its price be weighed out in silver. Where then does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? It is hidden from the eyes of every living thing, concealed even from the birds in the sky. Destruction and death say, only a rumor of it has reached our ears. God understands the way to it, and he alone knows where it dwells. For he views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. When he established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, when he made a decree for the rain and a path for the thunderstorm, then he looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it. And he said to the human race, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. And the gospel witness comes from Luke 20, reading from verse 27 to 38. And the title is Resurrection and Marriage. Some of the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus with a question. Teacher, they said, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first one married a woman and died childless. The second, and then the third, married her. And in the same way, the 7 died, leaving no children. Finally, the woman died too. Now then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married to her? Jesus replied, the people of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of taking part in the age to come, and in the resurrection from the dead, will neither marry nor be given in marriage. and they can no longer die, for they are like the angels. They are God's children, since they are children of the resurrection. But in the account of the burning bush, even Moses showed that the dead rise, for he called the Lord the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all are alive. Here ends the readings.
3 years ago, I was privileged to spend a year ministering in the Goulburn district churches. One of the churches was called Morialta. There's no town. It's just a church built on a hill. It was the church for the workers. There was another church built on another nearby, which was the church for the Anglicans, but it was, the people who were the property owners. This little church at Morialta had been built by the first pioneers, and their descendants looked after it. Beautifully kept. I got to know one of these descendants. His name was Lloyd Clements. Great guy. Didn't come to church, but he was there with all the other things we had, and the working bees and other things that happened in the parish. He'd be there. Just didn't turn up to church on Sundays. And then, quite unexpectedly, he died. And I found myself not being asked to do the funeral. What's going on here? We were mates, I thought. Well, it was done by a civil celebrant up in the Craigs Hill Chapel, where many of the funerals take place, in just outside of Goulburn. And I discovered that the reason was it was held there because Lloyd could not accept the notion of an afterlife. And I thought, if only we had talked about this, but we didn't have that chance. He just felt that he couldn't compromise what he felt he couldn't believe in. And yet, it was a marvellous celebration. A lot of people from the district were there. In fact, I was there a bit late and had to actually stand outside in the blazing sun. But it was a great celebration. Lloyd had left his mark, and this word kept on cropping up. He left his mark. He was a significant person and remembered significantly in the district. I want to take that notion up, leaving one's mark and the significance of life now. What kind of mark will we leave on earth? Many people fear the thought of leaving nothing or no one behind. Now, there's many cultural forms that this can take. My uncle died. In fact, he lived up here in Bryant Road. He died at the age of 34, leaving 2 infant daughters. And I remember hearing one distant family relative say, "Oh, what a pity. He had no sons." Like, the name wouldn't live on now. Well, you can take that as you will. Yet in other societies, in other cultures, in other traditions, not having children can mean disaster, male or female. And I can remember reading about an Ethiopian lady who in her village, a 17-year-old boy died, and the question was, who's going to remember that boy of 17 who died before he was being able to marry? And yet in such traditional societies it can be a very practical thing. If you have no children, then there's no security in old age. And that was disastrous. And maybe that connects with Moses' day, referred to in our scripture reading, where we read about what's called the Levirate law, You can look it up in the book of Leviticus, of which the Sadducees speak about to Jesus, which stipulated that if a man died without having had children, his brother should marry the widow on behalf of the husband who had died. And that still is a practice in Africa, particularly in the Sudan to this day. You see, it's also seen as the only way in which people could visualise life after death, if you left your mark in your children. Your significance is carried on in them. For the same reasons, people built enormous monuments like the pyramids in Egypt. And you know, those pyramids were built during a pharaoh's lifetime. They weren't built by his descendants afterwards. It was built by the pharaoh himself while he was alive, so that he would be remembered forever and ever and ever and ever. Well, I don't know whether people do know which pharaoh built which pyramid, but the truth is that one day the sands of time would cover such similar monuments. They would be forgotten. They'd be like statues found in the sand. You remember the Shelley poem? Where, having stumbled on this half-buried statue in the sand, read the inscription. What did the inscription say? My name is Ozymandias, King of kings, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Half buried in the sand. Eventually, all monuments and memories turned to dust. We were in England last year, and it was the 200th anniversary of what great event? Can you guess? Do you know? That's it, Waterloo. And, you know, there were all kinds of recalling that event and the life of Wellington and all that, and all these exhibitions. It's a bit like, once upon a time, that used to be remembered on a yearly basis, a bit like Anzac Day. But now it's only remembered when 100 years comes around. And it's probably difficult for us to think that later on in this week we have Remembrance Day, that the day will come when Remembrance Day will not be remembered anymore. So, while back to the scripture story again, while the Sadducees emphasised leaving one's mark in history now, there was another group, the Pharisees. They believed that there would be a resurrection from the dead, where our mark would be left in eternity. So you have these two rival religious groups, and of course there are others as well, but they were the two big ones. The Sadducees kind of believe that only the first 5 books, the Pentateuch as it's called, of the Bible, are authoritative. And of course, there is no mention of resurrection or anything like that in the first 5 books. The Sadducees said, well, you know, we've got the first 5 books, but then we've got all the prophets. We've got to listen to them too. And we've even got the writings like Job, and we should listen to them too. And you discover that later on, historically, down the track, when things weren't working out, the Pharisees were the ones who had this idea that there would be, if things aren't going to work out in this life, well then they'll have to work out in the next life. And so they picked up the idea of resurrection. The Sadducees tried to ridicule Jesus by coming up and extending the Levirate law with the woman who in the end had 7 husbands and no children. They tried to ridicule Jesus because to them it seemed that he'd sided with the Pharisees. But it's interesting to see how Jesus dealt with this. As with those who think that only they have the truth, they actually misrepresented Jesus. He actually agreed with neither. He didn't picture eternity as the Pharisees did. that is a place like this world, but heightened with marriage, etc. You know, it's a bit like golfers. If they love golf, they'll go to the golfer's heaven. And, you know, if you're a bowler, you'll go, when you die, to the bowler's heaven. I've even heard of the knitter's heaven. Can you imagine? I can't. Maybe crochet. Jesus goes outside the square entirely with a quite different answer. First, the resurrection reality is not a perfecting of this world. Whatever it is, it's another world, beyond understanding, as different from ours as God is different from us. Marriage is for this world to fulfill the social needs of humans. But in eternity, it's superfluous. And he says it's like a fellowship with God like that of the angels. Hence, the original question is absurd. But the real clincher, however, is when Jesus goes on to say, God is God of the living, not of the dead, for to him all are alive. What does this mean? I think what it means for me is that living is in the present. It's the present that counts. Significant life is in the present. Let me share these thoughts. First, to live in the present is to affirm that we are made by the past. You know the old saying of George Santayana, those who can't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Which raises the question as to why we have, for example, a Remembrance Day or an Anzac Day. What are we remembering? I can remember once I had to lead a service on Anzac Day in a church in Darwin when we were living there, and one of the congregation members was very upset. He said, "Jonathan, surely you're not going to bring Anzac into a church service, and we're not going to glorify war, are we?" And I thought, well, what are we remembering on such a day? Aren't we remembering it because we have to remember the folly and the horror of the war and its legacy? Why? In other words, you remember the past for good reason, not for glorifying, for example, war. Which then reminds us also that to live in the present is to recognise that the past and history is littered with what I call dead ideas, many which have power over us and have to be let go. I remember one of the seminal works that we used to read was one by Jean-Paul Sartre called The Philosophy of Revolution. And it's about the letting go of dead ideas. I mean, was Jesus implying that the Sadducees and the Pharisees in their rivalry were actually exposing or espousing dead ideas? Recently, some economists have suggested that we are in the grip of dead ideas about how a modern economy should work. We had a kind of a hint of this at the Bob Douglas seminar 2 or 3 weeks ago, where we think that somehow the only economic model is one that is based on perpetual growth. The kind of growth then that also means that we have to continue mining all the resources. In order to have more crops or have extra palm oil, we shear down the forests or burn them down. Now, I'm tempted to expand here, but I won't now. But I only want to make the point that to live in the present may require us to let go of those ways of thinking and acting which diminish life in the present, not just for us, but for our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I'll let you think out what some of the dead ideas that we might have to let go of if life is truly to be sustained on this planet. But the notion of letting go is crucial here. Now, in the lectionary over the last few weeks, we've had a series of stories about the necessity of letting go. The rich young ruler letting go of his wealth. Zacchaeus letting go of the kind of person that he was. All of those who are overly attached to their power or their wealth or their status, and even a spirituality which elevates people who think that they might think that elevates them over against others, who think these things give significance, are truly unwise. Only by letting go of these attachments can we hear the gospel word, which is, just as you are significant. You don't have to prove it. Oh, that's such an absurd but freeing word. It's the good news. And so for this good news to be internalized, to become part of who we are in our being, there needs to be that letting go of all what I call the pretenses and illusions which we cling to, which we think gives life significance. The illusion, for example, that ultimate security and meaning comes from possession. The pretense that pleasure is that which gives us happiness. Or thirdly, the idea that we can control relationships. Or fourthly, the illusion that our achievements add value to our human worth. And then fifthly, the arrogance of thinking we are better or superior to others because of our race, religion, culture, or even our own personal goodness. These illusions have to die in order for us to truly live the actual lives we have now. Pick up your bed, said Jesus. Let go of your excuses and live. To die to these illusions and truly live now. That's the possibility. It's a kind of resurrection in the present. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. And Jesus meant here and now to die to illusions and pretend. To die is to live now. And thus we are freed to live our destiny. What are we destined for? Have you ever actually seen your own face? You know you never did. You think you look in the mirror, but do you actually see your own face? No. Left is right and right is left. You see a mirror image. Faces are created to be seen ourselves only by others. In fact, our whole being, body, mind and spirit, is created in the direction of others. These bodies we inhabit now are where the divine reality dwells. God lives within us. This is where compassionate energy burns, where life is lived in its fullness, where significance is to be found. Earlier this year in the church that I go to at Christchurch Wayville, we reflected on the church as the community of the resurrection. And we record Ian Tanner, our first moderator in the Uniting Church, the late Ian Tanner, saying that at the Last Supper, when Jesus said, "This bread broken is my body, do this in remembrance of me," he could well have said, "You are my body. Live in remembrance of me." Convey to the world that life is significant now. God is God of the living, not of the dead.